Right now, somewhere, a guitarist is stomping on a pedal to make their guitar sound dirtier, louder, more aggressive. That crunchy, buzzing tone is everywhere: punk, grunge, metal, garage rock, all of it. It's such a basic ingredient of rock music that nobody even thinks about where it came from. Here's the reframe: that sound wasn't invented in a lab. It wasn't designed by an engineer with a soldering iron and a plan. It was created by accident on a two-lane highway in Mississippi by a busted car and a piece of wet cardboard. It's older than the electric guitar solo, older than rock and roll as a phrase, and it happened 3 years before Elvis Presley ever walked into a recording studio. The question is, how did a broken amplifier on the side of a road end up as the founding sound of an entire genre? To get there, we go back to March 1951. A group of musicians from Clarksdale, Mississippi, teenagers and 20-somethings, most of them under 20, are driving north on Highway 61 toward Memphis, Tennessee. They're led by a young piano player named Ike Turner, playing with his band the Kings of Rhythm. The trip happened because of a tip from B.B. King, who told a Memphis producer named Sam Phillips that this band was worth hearing. Phillips ran a small studio called the Memphis Recording Service, the same building where 3 years later a truck driver named Elvis Presley would walk in to record a birthday present for his mother. But that's later. Right now, it's just a car full of musicians, some handwritten lyrics they'd been finishing on the drive, and a guitar amp strapped to the roof, or, depending on which account you believe, jammed in the trunk near a flat tire. Accounts differ on the exact detail. What doesn't get disputed is what happened next. Somewhere on that stretch of highway, the amplifier came loose. It hit the road. By the time the band pulled into Memphis, guitarist Willie Kizart had a badly damaged amp. The speaker cone, the part of the speaker that physically vibrates to make sound, was torn. There was no replacement, no music store open, no spare amp waiting in the wings, just a broken piece of equipment and a session that was already booked. So they improvised. Sam Phillips would later describe it simply: the woofer had burst, so he stuffed it, newspaper, brown wrapping paper, whatever was on hand, to hold the torn cone together enough to make it usable again. Think about that. The fix wasn't clever engineering, it was packing material. Here's what makes this so important. When Kizart plugged that patched up amp back in and played, it didn't sound clean anymore. It buzzed, it rattled, it distorted. The sound broke up into something rougher and fuzzier than anything a guitar was supposed to sound like in 1951. By every normal standard of the era, this was a problem. Recording engineers spent their careers chasing clarity, not distortion. A torn speaker cone was something you fixed before a session, not something you recorded through. But Sam Phillips didn't hear a problem. He heard something he'd later say he'd been chasing without knowing it, a sound so different it would be hard to categorize. He kept it. He built the whole recording around it. That's the hinge point. One producer's ear in one room decided that broken was better than fixed. Song they recorded that day was called Rocket 88, a rowdy, boastful tune about a car, the Oldsmobile Rocket 88, full of double entendres about speed, women, and status. Jackie Brenston, the band's saxophonist, sang lead, and the record was released under the name Jackie Brenston and his Delta Cat, a band that strictly speaking didn't exist. It was just Ike Turner's band with a different name slapped on it by the record label. Underneath Brenston's vocals and the boogie-woogie piano and the honking saxophone, that fuzzy, broken amp guitar tone rumbles through the entire track. It's not a solo moment. It's not a special effect saved for the chorus. It's just there the whole time, giving the song a raw, aggressive edge that Jump blues records simply didn't have before. Rocket 88 came out on Chess Records in the spring of 1951. It hit #1 on the Billboard R&B chart. It stayed there for 5 weeks. It sold close to 1 million copies. And here's the but, the part where this stops being a nice music trivia story and starts being genuinely important. For decades, music historians have pointed to Rocket 88 as a serious candidate for the first rock and roll record. Not the only candidate, that argument never really ends, but one of the strongest ones, precisely because of that distorted guitar tone. It's the earliest widely heard recording where a broken electric guitar sound isn't a mistake left on the cutting room floor. It's the hook. Even Ike Turner pushed back on the label during his lifetime. He didn't think Rocket 88 was rock and roll, he thought it was rhythm and blues. But he put it a different way that historians love to quote. He didn't think Rocket 88 was rock and roll, but he did think it was the reason rock and roll exists. Same event, two ways of framing it. Either way, something shifted in that room. Here's a detail that rarely makes the highlight reel, and it's worth sitting with. Jackie Brenston, credited as the songwriter, sold his rights to the song for $910. Ike Turner, whose band actually built the arrangement, was paid $20 for the session. $20 for a song that would end up cited in music textbooks 70+ years later. That's not a footnote about fairness in the music industry, though it certainly is that too. It's a reminder that nobody in that room in 1951 thought they were making history. They thought they were making a regional R&B single, getting paid a session fee, and moving on to the next gig. The historic label got attached decades later by people looking backward. But here's what makes the accident matter beyond one record. That torn speaker cone sound didn't stay locked inside Rocket 88. Once it existed on a hit record, other guitarists started chasing it on purpose. Through the 1950s and into the 60s, guitarists experimented with ways to recreate that broken, buzzing tone deliberately, turning amps up past their clean limits. In some documented cases, literally damaging speakers on purpose to get the same effect Kizart had stumbled into by accident. What started as a repair job became a technique. By 1962, an electronics company called Gibson released something called the Maestro Fuzz-Tone, a small pedal built specifically to recreate that torn speaker buzz on demand, no damaged amplifier required. Musicians no longer needed a highway accident. They could just step on a box. Here's what makes this so important. An entire category of guitar effects, fuzz pedals, distortion pedals, everything that eventually leads to the overdriven roar of hard rock and metal, traces its lineage back to a piece of equipment nobody meant to break. Once fuzz and distortion were tools instead of accidents, the sound spread everywhere. Garage rock bands in the 60s leaned into it. The Rolling Stones used a fuzz pedal to define the guitar riff on Satisfaction in 1965. Jimi Hendrix built an entire sonic identity around controlled distortion by the late 60s. And by the time bands like Black Sabbath were cranking amplifiers past their limits in the early 70s to get that heavy, ominous crunch, distortion wasn't an accident anymore. It was the entire point. Every single one of those moments is downstream of a torn speaker cone on Highway 61 in 1951. Think about that, the sound that defines heavy in rock music, the sound millions of guitarists deliberately chase today, exists because a piece of gear broke on a road trip and nobody had time to fix it properly. A band drives to a recording session with a busted amplifier they can't replace. A producer decides the broken sound is more interesting than the clean one. A song about a car becomes a regional smash, a #1 R&B hit, and one of history's strongest candidates for the first rock and roll record. The guitarist who made the sound gets a footnote. The singer gets $910, the bandleader gets $20, and the torn speaker buzz that nobody planned becomes a technique, then a pedal, then a genre-defining sound that runs in a straight line from 1951 all the way to every distortion pedal on every pedal board today. So next time you hear a guitar snarl through an amp, fuzzy, dirty, aggressive, that's not a modern invention. That's a repair job from a Memphis recording session in 1951, still playing. Turns out rock and roll didn't need a plan to start. It just needed a bad road, a torn speaker, and someone willing to hit record on the mess. And maybe that's the real lesson buried in this story. The most influential sounds in music history rarely come from someone chasing perfection. They come from someone standing in a room with a broken piece of equipment, a deadline they can't push back, and just enough curiosity to ask, what if we kept it anyway? So maybe the next time something unexpectedly breaks in your life, a plan, a project, a piece of gear, don't rush to throw it out. Sit with the mess for a second. Somewhere in music history, that one unplanned pause is exactly what quietly changed everything.